And there we go. Thank you guys again so very much for joining the panel with me. And like I said a second ago, I'm not going to hold you guys, but I want to make sure that I at least explain this a little bit to you. For starters, this is extremely a safe space. This is not a platform for debate or anything like that. These are literally your experiences, and I want to hear from you and what you feel that we can honestly learn from them. Okay. Also, this is not just for you as the panelists, but also for the audience that will be listening at a later time. These are our opinions. These are our facts from our experiences, from our own eyes. And so we're not here to try to defend our experiences in any kind of way, shape, form, or fashion. So with that being said, again, I want to thank my panelists so very much for being on. Miss Antoinette, Miss Ache, which I totally love that name, and Mr. Jermaine. Again, thank you guys so much for joining. So my very first question is actually for you, Antoinette. So how did your family explain race or color or skin tone to you? Was it a formal conversation, or how did you become to know more about it?
So the earliest experience I have with that is that I came home from kindergarten one day and I told my mom that I wanted to be white.
Oh, wow.
And I said this to her because I noticed that the white girls in my class, I grew up in Southern California, just for reference for everybody. So in most spaces when I was growing up, there were not a lot of other Black kids. That's not to say that there were none, but there weren't very many. And so I think that at the time, my feeling was, I want really long, pretty hair, like all the white girls in my class. And so that was my basis for saying it. But when I said that to my mother responded with, absolutely not. Your Blackness is beautiful. You need to love and cherish that. So what started off as something that was probably pretty innocent for my little 5-year-old mind, my mother made sure to, let's stomp on that right away and let you know that your Blackness is something that you need to be proud of. And it's a good thing that she did, because there was a lot of messaging throughout the 90s that would have made Black girls feel like their Blackness was not something to be cherished. And so that was the starting point with me and my family.
That's when I am so, I'm blown away from hearing that. And so Jermaine, I'm coming right to you in just a second. But similar situation with me. I was also 5. My mother is extremely light. My father is extremely dark. And I literally went to elementary school telling people that my mom was white and my dad was Black. But I don't remember my mother ever telling me that I shouldn't believe that, or this is what the reality is. And so along those same lines, and same question, Jermaine, for you, obviously you have a darker skin tone than the other panelists here, which is why I definitely want to come to you, because you're reminding me of my father right now.
Okay.
But how did that conversation come up for you as a kid? Like, when were you first introduced to your skin tone is different?
Yeah, so I was raised by my mom, and there wasn't never any, I guess, explicit formal conversation concerning colorism or anything like that. But I was certainly exposed to let's say the consequences of colorism just by my peers. There are a lot of sort of pejorative terms that people would use with respect to being dark. A lot of my peers would call me Blackie and things of that nature.
Oh, wow.
And so from a very early age, I was very much aware of my skin tone. As a young child, I think the ideas concerning, Black being beautiful or having dark skin being beautiful, it doesn't have as much force when you're a child versus when you grow into adulthood. And I think that's especially the case for Black men, because even within the media, it's a lot easier for me to, let's say, sort of make reference to people who are in the media who are sort of celebrities who are considered now sort of sex symbols or something like that.
Yeah,
so you have Taye Diggs or Morris Chestnut, etc. And so that I think that bodes well for Black men, uh, uh, and I think that has less of an positive impact when you're a young child. But I think unfortunately, Black women who have dark skin tones, I think their experience is a bit different because I think there are fewer dark-skinned, let's say, female celebrities who people can just sort of naturally rattle off in their mind, who are considered like beautiful sex symbols.
Yes.
So I think my experience is probably a bit different than Black women who have darker skin tones. But just to answer your initial question, there wasn't a whole lot of explicit conversation with my mother concerning skin tone, at least, trying to like affirm my value as a dark skin. It's just sort of, just make sure you maintain a tough skin around people who aren't so kind when they're young. So
when they're, and that I get. And just to add, everyone, I think Kyle has just joined in with us.
Hello.
As well. So Kyle, welcome to the platform here. We definitely appreciate you.
Thank you.
Ache, I want to come to you really quickly with that question, and I want to take it a little bit further. Have you experienced any level of discrimination in regards to your skin tone or your color itself now that you have entered adulthood? And if so, can you describe that experience?
Okay, so I'm going to go back to, let me just touch up on the original question, because that's going to be really when I learned.
Gotcha.
So my family from the South, they're from Houma, Louisiana, Chauvin.
Okay.
And so in our family, we had, which is the beautiful thing about Blacks, that's the full range. My aunt was light, as they would say, damn near white. She had blonde hair. My uncle was red, called bone red.
Yeah.
My mom was brown skin, so to speak, and then my one of my favorite aunts, she was dark skin. So we had the whole realm, and it wasn't unusual for me to see that. And it wasn't. I had already experienced my aunt, the oldest, being perceived as white, and she was really clear I'm anything but. And it was always very interesting to witness that. So I grew up safe around in terms of that type of colorism, so to speak.
Understood.
And so my mother was always like, instilled from the very beginning, we are Flemings, we are proud, we are beautiful. Y'all don't know what Flemings are, but if you were in that part, you would know. We are Flemings, and that's just what we did, right?
Right.
And then it shifted one day, and I just talked about this the other day.
When it shifted, were you still a kid, or was it?
I am. So when it shifted, I was still a kid. So I was just talking about this the other day. I was about 7 or 8. And my parents had a room, we called it the library, the study, had all these books, and I was always welcome to go read. And I picked up the book, A Woman Called Moses. And it would just pique my curiosity, because I had known about, Moses in the Bible, who was a man, but who was this woman? And so I took the book, took it upstairs, and I read it that weekend. And I remember I came downstairs and I held the book up to my mother, and I said to her, is it true? What the content of this book? And so first of all, she's like, who told you to read that book? I'm like, and she said yes. And I remember I just cried, because it was hard for me to begin to articulate, and I couldn't process how one group of individuals could commit such atrocities against another. And what I said is that these people have sinned against us. And how is this possible? I said, you lied to me. So you lied to me. I'm not safe. This is not a place where I'm safe. And she was like, no, sweetie, we cannot. But I said, no, where am I going to go? We are in this state. We are in, as far as I know, and of course, and that was my heart broke at that time. So a couple months later, I did a book report on it. This is when I really got clear about race, because my teacher, I got to see she was really uncomfortable about what I was talking about. I was there's one only other Black person in the classroom who was my best friend. And people were just, they were shifting in their seats and stuff, and she stopped me. First of all, she made me wait to the end, because she knew what I was doing. But she stopped me. She said, you got an A, no problem, don't worry about it. Well, I called my mother. And
I was about to ask. Yeah.
I called my mom. My mom came up, and this is where so not only did I realize that, but they began to label me as militant. I was 7, maybe 8.
Mm.
And they said, we're really concerned that Ache is becoming really militant. We're not really clear why you're allowing her to read these books. Because from there, I went to Native Son, Richard Wright.
Ache.
And so
I don't mean to interrupt. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I just need to be clear on this. They were labeling you at 7 years old as militant.
I'm never gonna forget that word. I'm never, because
forget a word like that when you're
old. I can never, yeah. And so at 7, 8, I was labeled that. And yeah, my mother advocated, and they didn't know. My mother came up, they got to know Dr. Lytle real well. But even as my mother was advocating for me, and I know and no one else did anything, my relationship with my teachers changed because I became the militant, right? At 7, 8. And I began to get really clear that, first of all, that because I did the book report because I wanted people to be alive to my pain, to be alive to the betrayal that I was feeling, to be alive to the injustice that had happened. So I'm thinking they didn't know, I'm 7, 8. Well, not everybody can know this, mommy, and they weren't. And so I got, you need to be quiet because it makes us uncomfortable, that your voice doesn't really matter. And that, and if you don't acquiesce, then we get to label you. So I was at that school until 8th grade, and that was in 4th grade. So that was when I became really aware about my race.
Yeah.
So, Ache, along that same lines, bringing that to your adulthood, obviously that one word has stuck with you. Okay, so obviously that there's some type of impact that's there, but here in 2020. Are you still having to face issues like that?
Yes, absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Oh, wow.
I think that what is good is for In Her Power, right? That's where I work with women of color leaders, is that what's great is that we create this space where we support one another in that, right?
Yeah.
And that we begin to unlearn behavior that we sometimes unconsciously, we don't know that we've embodied and embraced and claim to be our ideology when it really isn't. But yeah, I mean, I'm a speaker now though, so.
That's right.
So Kyle, I want to go back to that original question for you as well.
Okay.
In regards to your first introduction to your skin tone and what that conversation looked like between you and your family. How were you exposed to your skin tone?
Oh, wow. See, honestly, I never really had to deal with that growing up, but I always knew it existed.
So when did you first learn about it existing?
Ooh, I'd have to say when I was like maybe 7 or 8. You have different shades of black. You have light skin, you have dark skin, then you have brown skin. And growing up, I would always hear some people say, "Oh, I'm not black, I'm brown." And I just never really knew what they meant by that because I thought we were all black, but that's I had to. Yeah, I was introduced to that at a very young age. So it kind of stuck with me.
I would imagine.
Yeah.
So Antoinette, I want to ask you about this. Especially here, still in 2020. This was not originally a part of the original portion or the reason or purpose for the panel, but I've got the accents all going on now. This whole issue, Antoinette, about these companies wanting to deal with more diversity hires and literally hiring people to control or administer their organizations for diversity. How have you been impacted by this, or have you been impacted by this?
Yes, I have been impacted by this because I have more people these are people who I'm both acquainted with and who I don't know, who are reaching out looking for guidance and, some sort of help us find a place to start sort of a thing. And You know, I think that the reaction that all of us has to what the world is doing right now, some of it is virtue signaling, some of it is pandering, some of it, I mean, you can call it so many different things. And I really think it's up to the individual, because I mean, I don't know everybody at Zillow. I just know that Zillow doesn't have any Black people serving as C-level executives, or they might.
Wow.
So, you know, in the one sense, I celebrate that there are companies and there are people in positions of power who are at least able to recognize now that this is an issue and it needs to be dealt with more publicly, more visibly. Because, I mean, I can remember back in 2016, which it's totally it's not a coincidence that that was our last election year for president too. I really do feel that a lot of this stuff is happening all because of that. But back to what I was saying. You know, back in 2016, I didn't see any companies willing to state publicly that Black lives mattered.
Yeah.
I didn't see them making any efforts to put any sort of Black people into their marketing and their messaging and imaging. So the fact that these things are being brought about now, I think that that's good. But I think that we have to be careful in how much credit we give people, simply because I'm not going to be satisfied with them taking a woman off of the pancake mix and letting people have Juneteenth off. You know, like that's cool, but we need more to really, you know, get at, if you're really looking to solve this problem, we need more than that, or at least I know that's what I'm expecting. And so I've been trying to filter that into the messages, into the conversations that I have with people about working on diversity. But I'm being very selective right now in who I will actually work for when it comes to that, because I think that it's so, can we just agree that as Black people, we have so many hoops to jump through? Can we all just agree on that?
I totally agree.
Hold up now. Don't go there.
I'm sorry. I have to agree.
Again.
Okay, I'm just saying now. I'm like Ache here. I'm like, I'm Black, I'm gay, I'm living in Memphis, Tennessee. I'm like, I am married. I'm like, when you talk about hoops, like I feel like I damn near invented them. So honey, I think we all can agree.
Yes.
So you know, I don't like to come down on people who, like, maybe somebody goes and takes that job as a diversity, maybe they're like VP of diversity, or, you know, that's what their job is. I can't get mad at them because, hey, that's an opportunity at a great company, but it becomes so easy for that company to then use you, you know, as a pawn. And that's the tough part.
For their own hidden agenda. And you know what, so even speaking of that, you brought us some really good things in regards to body image, and it's bringing me back to what Jermaine spoke about a second ago, and how the imagery of especially with dark-skinned men are different from the imagery of women that are dark-skinned. And so still along those lines of diversity, Jermaine, is there anything or any way we could possibly support one another to try to assist and help the mass media or the world to kind of see us all a little bit more equally?
Yeah.
I know it's a tough question. I know it's loaded. It's loaded. It's on your face, man. I get it.
It's certainly a tough question. I think to some degree, and you know, I'm not quite sure exactly how this would look, but at least in principle, I think, I guess, as consumers of media, we'll have to continue to advocate for, I guess, a more broad array of skin tones in the media. And, you know, I was making reference to, you know, the celebrities who have sort of been elevated as sex symbols, and it's sort of easier to think of dark-skinned men or light-skinned Black women. And, you know, I mean, you've had, you know, Whoopi Goldberg, but generally she doesn't sort of present herself as sort of like this sex symbol. And then you have Lupita and there's just not as many. And I think, so I think to some degree, and I think we're actually moving in this direction. But I think we just have to continue to make our voices known concerning what's considered beautiful. And I think sometimes people don't understand how a lot of sort of our perceptions concerning colorism are informed by a really dark history. And even there's this book titled Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome by Dr. Joy DeGruy, and she talked about how even light-skinned slave women were if a slave master was looking to buy or purchase a slave, she was worth 10 times more than a dark-skinned enslaved woman. So this is largely based on sort of a really, really dark past, and a lot of these ideas have sort of been perpetuated into the future. And there's a lot of just even in terms of the sciences, there's been this idea that that sort of a person's value is sort of biologically instantiated in their skin pigmentation. And there's this biologist named Carl von Linnaeus who lived in the 1800s, and he's responsible for our modern sort of taxonomy system for animals. And so you hear species and genus and phylum and things of that nature. Well, he extended that to humans, and he saw skin tone as sort of a proxy for, let's say, morality or even intelligence. And he had said something like, he called sort of white people, he deemed them that he conferred this label to them called Homo Europaeus, and he says, if you're white, you're gentle and you're governed by laws, and if you're black, or what he called Homo Afro, he says you're cunning and you're governed by caprice, and you're more likely to be violent and things of that nature. And I think those things still inform the way in which people think today. And so I know there's a really dark past that I think people need to sort of reckon with, because I think it informs the way in which people consider or think about beauty or who's violent and things of that nature. And I don't think it's coincidental that a lot of the people who are, let's say, been the victims of, say, racially biased police brutality are dark-skinned. So you have, George Floyd or Ahmaud Arbery or even Breonna Taylor, they're all dark-skinned. And I think to some degree, there's something about dark skin that's been villainized in a way. And I think it's still dealing with the consequences of that today.
We definitely are. And I will say that I'm not trying to offend anybody, so please don't take it this way. But I was initially one of those people. I'm not dark, but I'm a brown, if you want to say that. And I'm like, my entire mother's family line was always lighter. And I considered myself to be different, and not necessarily better or worse, just different. It was more like I don't fit in on this side and I don't fit in on this side. And it wasn't until I was married to a biracial man that I really realized how dark I am. And then when we are together, how we are completely treated differently. And we went to Chicago earlier or last year, which actually prompted wanting to have this particular conversation, because things that happened up there has never occurred to me whatsoever. I've literally grew up in a colorblind home. Like, we did not see color that way. And so it is, especially now with what's going on here in 2020, it's like a whole new freaking conversation. And I think that people like myself and even you all, we need that education. We're here within the same damn community. We live in our own damn bubbles, and all we know is what's in our immediate circle. I have no idea what Jermaine has gone through, or Kyle has gone through, or Antoinette or Ache, unless I have the fucking conversation. Right. I have to ask the questions, and I just have to. And so, Jermaine, you brought up in regards to the victims of racism. So, Kyle, I'm going to go to you with this particular question. Okay. So, number one, I said all of that to kind of set myself up for this. So, very first question is, Kyle, have you ever considered yourself to be racist? Number one. While you're
Oh
thinking about
goodness.
that, I know. While you're thinking about that,
Oh, you
I'm gonna
putting me on
follow
the
up with,
spot.
yes, I am. I'm gonna give you a second to think about it now. You only got a second. So number
Okay.
one, have you ever considered yourself to be racist, whether to the colors or the shades within your own community or even other races? So number one. And then
Okay.
secondly, a victim of racism. How can we possibly, how can someone that has been a victim of racism overcome that pain?
Ooh.
Yeah,
Ooh,
so
that's a
number
tough
one,
one.
racism, racist. I want to know. Number one.
Ooh.
And Ache, I know you're quiet over there, but I'm coming to you next.
Oh boy. Okay. So number one, I have not considered myself to be racist. Mainly because growing up, my mom and my dad always taught me to treat each other with respect, treat the other person like you would want them to treat you, regardless of what color their skin tone is or what their race, nationality, sexuality, religion is, regardless. You know, those are some moral values that my mom and dad instilled in me growing up, and they pretty much still enforce that in my mind today. Even though I'm almost 30 years old, that's something that they still that's something that they still put in my mind today. Now to answer the second question, you said, was I ever a victim of
not necessarily you,
Mhm.
but putting yourself in the shoes of a victim of racism. How do you believe that that particular victim can overcome what has occurred to them?
Oh wow. Um Honestly, I don't I don't think they can overcome it, because if you think about it, I know people like Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, Thurgood Marshall, and all of these other African Americans. They made a difference.
Yeah.
And there is some diversity in this world today. However, I think that there are still people who are set in their ways, and they still like to target those who are a certain skin color or a certain race.
Yeah.
So I just think the best way, I think I'll take that back. I think the best way to overcome it is to educate them. Yeah.
I agree. I definitely agree with you on that. Again, you guys are educating me now on some things. So I definitely do appreciate that. So Ache, I'm coming to you. So very first question, have you ever considered yourself a racist or of any shade within the community or any other race?
So I'm going back to my earlier high school days and in college. So in high school, I ended up going to convince my mother to let me go to the public school, Berkeley High. They had the only African American Studies department in the country, still do.
Okay.
And then I went to Berkeley, where June Jordan was still there, Julie Malveaux were there, and everything else like that. And so I bring that up because they were very adamant that racism is more about the systemic powerness and economic power that one group has over the other. So therefore, we really cannot be racist. We can be prejudiced, but we cannot be racist. And I remember when a student said, well, Black people are racist. And Dr. Julia Malveaux, she's like, oh, sweetie, have a seat. And she got to teaching and talking about how that was not possible in this country. And I remember at that point, I'm like, oh, because I was like, oh, can we, I think we all can be racist. And she's like, no, how it's set up? No, until we get equal power, economic, socially, all of that, then it's not. Now, we may have prejudices, okay, and that's different. Now, I agree with that. I agree, and we see that because that's just that racism. I know we use that word casually and we throw it out, right? But I really want to clarify that racism is about those who are in dominant power. We look at it, even if we look at what it really means from a historical, economical point of view, it's different. Now, have I been prejudiced? I've had some prejudice fatigue I'm gonna call it that. I lived in Buenos Aires for 3 years. I was the only Black person that I saw, and they have their own practices. Like they see a Black person, they want to rub you for good luck and all this other stuff. By the time I came back to the States, I was tired of white folks. I'm just gonna be real clear. I was tired.
Oh, wow.
I was like, I don't want to see, I don't want to talk, you know, because being 3 years in that place and navigating that type of behavior, you know, I went to Brazil and that made it all better. But still, by the time I got back, I was weary. I was absolutely weary of that. So I have had it where I don't even want to, no. I need you to go read a book and learn, come back and have a conversation. That's just where I was.
So, Ache, I really want to hear your answer to that last question as well, in regards to putting yourself in the shoes of a victim of racism. Like, obviously you've had your own traumatic experience, but is it something you feel that a person can overcome?
Okay. So if I'm putting that, overcome that person's racism or overcome my reaction to it?
Overcome your own, because as a victim, anything that happens to you, it stays with you. It changes you. It alters you to a degree. And so I'm really curious to hear your opinion of whether or not a person can overcome what has occurred to them.
I have to say yes, because I think we can look at history and see that that's what we've done. If we were to look at how we've been treated, how we've been mistreated, how we've been dishonored, all the lynchings and killings and murderings and rapings and just right? All of that in our history. And then we come and we look at how we are, in many ways, still building relationships, our friendships cross color lines. So can it be? Yeah, that's evident in that. We've demonstrated that. You know, it's interesting because my grandmother would always talk about when something would happen, and she would go to a certain place to, you know, to look beyond and look broader and stuff like that. I remember my uncle, like, you know, sometimes I'm tired of that. Like, I get tired of always having to be that one. But I have to say, I think that collectively as a race, we have done that. I think one of the videos that was that went viral when the sister was saying, you know, y'all ought to be lucky. We're not for revenge. We just for equality.
Right.
And so we have overcome that. It doesn't mean we don't have menticide. It doesn't mean we don't have the effects of the racism. It doesn't mean any of that. But we definitely have demonstrated our resilience, even our willingness. And even if we don't want to say, even our forgiveness, a level of collective forgiveness that we've had historically to move forward and move through.
Yeah, I love that. That's why I had to ask you. I want to hear it.
I feel so educated.
Like, I know, I'm telling you,
Yes.
I am so, first off, I cannot thank you all enough for agreeing to come on. And I'm going to ask you all one final question, and I'm going to come around to everyone. Kyle, I'm going to start with you.
Okay.
If we can learn anything from this entire conversation, in regards to being able to bridge those gaps, because there's a lot of different gaps here. You brought up something earlier today in regards to just the different shades within our community. We're not even going to talk about sexual orientation or political views. There's so many different gaps within our own organization, our own cultures, I should say. How can we bridge some of those? Like, if we've learned anything today, or even something you've heard somewhere else, in your opinion, how can we bridge some of those gaps?
Bridge something. Honestly, it would have to go back to what I said earlier, by sitting down and educating those who are not open-minded to change. I feel like the reason why they're so closed-minded is because they don't know. So I feel like if we sit down and educate them on, hey, the different shades about racism, you know, I feel like they'll have a better opinion than what they have now.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. Ache, same question. Like, how do you feel that we can bridge some of those gaps, or even start the conversation to be able to bridge those gaps?
So for me, I feel like it's really working within our own culture, our own community. And so I said I work with women of color leaders. Well, that's part of our conversation. That's part of the dialogue that we have. And that as we begin to heal that and really begin to look at the history so we understand how we have adopted behavior that really is not really our origin. There's a quote that says that power is creating a belief system and practice, and then getting another group to practice it on their own while thinking that they have owned that and created that. That's power.
Yes.
And that's exactly what has happened. We have adopted a practice and ideology by a group of white people. We've made it our own, have used it against one another, so they don't even have to do anything. That's real power. It's real slick.
That is a lot of power. That is a lot of power.
So for us to start having that education and reclaim our own power, we redefine and really not give that lip service like, yeah, I'm gonna define my beauty. I'm gonna define, no. Are you really? Because I want you to have a real honest look at that. Like really stop and begin to really, really redefine what that means for you. And when we can do that, because y'all know we powerful, we
Amen.
We can mobilize around that. Shit, excuse me, but you know how we used to say back in the day. Shit.
I like her.
I love her. Oh my gosh.
That's my new best friend.
Like seriously now. Like, oh my God. Jermaine, same question. How do you think or feel that we could bridge some of those gaps?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think.
Jermaine, are you there?
Yeah, can you
Oh,
hear
there you
me?
go.
I think.
Yeah, I can. Go ahead.
There are two. I think there are two main points of intervention. I think there's let's say an intraracial intervention and an interracial one. I think amongst our own, let's say, racial demographic, we do need to educate ourselves concerning how where a lot of the beliefs that we have adopted came from, because to some degree, and to echo the point that Ache made, it's like sometimes we become co-conspirators in our own plight because we're carrying on things that sort of happened. We're sort of replicating our own trauma amongst one another, and we've sort of siphoned it off from history concerning what's happened to us. So I think that's one intervention point that I think is really, really important. And then two, yeah, I think there needs to be additional conversation across racial lines, because I think there has been this conspiracy to engage in this collective denial concerning what's happened to Black people in this country, and I think people are woefully undereducated concerning that, and I think a lot of what's happening now, even through social media with all the things people are posting about history. Is people are realizing that whatever they were taught, let's say in their history classes in school, was this really sanitized history concerning what's happened in this country. So I think pursuing truth is really important, and because a lot of these kids, let's say if you're white and you grow up in a school system where they provide you with this sanitized history, and you become a politician. And it's like the policies that you actually enact it's just like, it's based in this sort of really sort of hackneyed sort of ignorant ideology. And it's like, well, you don't know anything. So it's like, you start to put things in place that harm people. And it's like, and you start to have a particular view of people that isn't really based in sort of fact and in history. And it's like it can just end up, perpetuating this really terribly oppressive system. So I think education at every level of society, I think is a good way to sort of bring about that reconciliation that you're asking about.
Thank you. I again cannot agree more. Antoinette, same question, darling. How do you feel we can bridge those gaps?
So right now, what I'm feeling most inspired by is the fact that the world seems to be open to listening to the experiences of Black people for what seems like the first time in my lifetime. I'm 36. So this is the first time I've ever seen this happen since I've been alive. And I like that. I like that more voices are being heard, and so therefore more perspectives are being acknowledged when it comes to non-Black people. I would really love to see the Black community get to a place where we can acknowledge the different experiences of different Black people. Because Kyle, you were talking about how you were saying that we need to educate people on, you know, what different experiences look like. And I agree with that wholeheartedly, but the person who is being educated has to be open to that education too.
Yes.
They have to be open to accepting that there are different versions of what Black looks like. And because Ache, you talked a lot about your family, and I just have to make a mention of that because that's something that I didn't have when I was growing up. Both of my parents are still married, but we lived far away from extended family. I'm an only child. I mentioned earlier that I grew up in Southern California. So my experience as a Black girl, very far removed from what it might have looked like if I had grown up in a place like Mississippi or Alabama or Florida, where my father is originally from. And so, but it seems like anytime that becomes, like anytime people notice that, the response that I've usually gotten is a lot of ridicule and a lot of, you know, pushing me away because I was somehow not Black enough. And I really would like to see us get to a point where we can get rid of all this Black enough stuff, because I think that as a collective, we have so much pain and so many issues. I see, girl, and so many issues and so many things that we need to weed through, that we don't need to be over here clubbing each other over the head with, oh, you don't listen to this music, or you're not. That's not the point. Not right now, it's not. Let's get to an even playing field first, and then maybe we can go into the nitty gritty with all of that. But I really just think that as Black people, we collectively need healing. We collectively need safe space. We collectively need to be there for each other, especially if they're going to put us on. We can't be divided against each other if they're going to put us on, y'all. We got to get it together, okay? It's almost showtime. So that's what I think. To answer your question, I think that's how we get past this, is Black people also acknowledging that there are different experiences within the Black community, and that's not our fault.
Antoinette, can I just say, because I grew up in Northern California, so I understand. I'm in Oakland, but you know, the San Francisco Bay Area. So I absolutely get it. And believe it or not, y'all, they used to think I was a Valley girl. I didn't know what a Valley girl was. So I get that. And then I would go, I didn't. But my family's from the South, so I would go there for the summers and stuff. So that's where I did get that education, and I would come back. But I hear you on that. I absolutely 100% do. And since so many Black, you know, had that great migration from the South, and yeah, we got to know that. That's part of our history too. When 70% of Black folks have migrated from the South to California.
Right. See, that is honestly a great place to end, because it wraps everything up in regards to this entire panel and the whole purpose of it. We are all different. All of our stories must be told. And I love the fact that we all are different shades and we all have different experiences. And one quote that sticks with me every single day: if you feel like the weight of it is literally because you are silly enough to think that you are bearing it alone, we are all in this together. So I want to thank my panelists. I love you guys so very much, like on a deeper level right about now. I feel more educated than ever before. I will be reaching back out to you guys just to make sure that I stay in touch. I'm sure I got some more questions to ask. So, look forward that.